What's up guys, Lifting here. This is a build guide for an Ice Shot Slayer that I've recently had a good time with. In this video I'm going to present the skill setup, tell you why I picked the Slayer Ascendancy, show you the passive tree progression, what kind of gear it needs to work, and finally give you some tips on how to level the build and suggestions for leveling gear. Before all that, I just want to give a big shout out to my Patreon supporters for all that you do. I appreciate you guys, thank you very much. And remember, if you become a Patreon and we ever meet in real life, I'm gonna kiss you on the mouth with tongue. Also, for anyone out there who still isn't a subscriber, shame! Make sure to smash that subscribe button, and while you're at it, why don't you smash that? Why don't you smash that like button too? Thanks. Let's begin. The build is designed to be a fast mapper with good boss killing potential. I've taken it up to and including the Shaper without any problems, and I haven't tried Uber Elder. But I don't see that being an issue as long as you have the nerd skills, like me. That said, it is a bow build, and like many others of this type, it can feel a bit glass cannon-y at times, but it isn't too bad if you take your precautions. It's played as the Slayer Ascendancy for a few reasons, but the main one is that due to the new Overwhelm keystone, even bows with a low base critical strike chains becomes easy to scale as a crit build. In our case it means that the 5% base critical strike chains that our bow has effectively becomes 8% instead. And this makes a huge difference for the overall end result when all the critical strike chains modifiers have been applied. The build also used the Headsman and Bane of Legends keystones for a significant damage, attack and movement speed boost, with the added benefit of becoming immune to physical reflect and being able to call enemies at 20% health. Something that is greatly appreciated for those very tanky bosses. Finally, we picked the Endless Hunger keystone for some powerful extra life leech from overkill damage and stun and bleed immunity while leeching. It uses Ice Shot as its main clear skill and Barrage for single target supplied with the Void Shot ability obtained through the Void Fletcher quiver. But more on that later. The build is designed around having a high critical strike chance to ensure Ice Shot being able to reliably freeze enemies, as this will enable other damage multipliers to further scale damage, and of course add the benefit of the fact that frozen enemies doesn't do much damage. Now let's take a look at the gem setups we use for this build. I wanted to use a skill that would grant me some fast clear speed potential for the Legion monoliths, and I ended up deciding on Ice Shot. Due to the fact that it is a bow skill and lots of these are pretty good for the Legion monoliths, I link it to greater multiple projectiles, elemental damage with attacks, hypothermia, Mirage Archer, and cold penetration. With Ice Shot linked to greater multiple projectiles, we will, instead of just shooting one arrow, shoot 5. This helps tremendously in terms of clear speed by allowing us to cover a much larger area, with the added benefit of Ice Shot being able to cover more of the ground in ice too. Something that is of extra benefit when used together with hypothermia, that adds a big damage multiplier to any enemy that is either chilled or frozen. Mirage Archer is another great way to further increase the clear speed of the build. It works so that when you hit an enemy with Ice Shot, this Mirage guy appears above your head and starts shooting at nearby enemies with the skill it has been linked to. In this case, Ice Shot. This is especially useful for those situations where you find yourself surrounded by enemies such as the Legion monoliths, as you won't only be attacking what's right in front of you, but also everywhere around you with the help of the Mirage dude. For single target, we use Barrage linked to greater multiple projectiles, elemental damage with attacks, elemental focus, cold penetration, and added cold damage. Nothing much needs to be explained here. So let's jump ahead to the next gem setup. For this we use Herald of Ice, Curse on Hit, Assassin's Mark, and Onslaught. Through this, anytime the Shatter Freeze effect from Herald of Ice procs, we get a chance to proc Onslaught, which then provide a 20% attack, cast and movement speed buff. Besides this, the Curse on Hit will apply Assassin's Mark and via this generate power charges, which goes to help increasing our critical strike chains. Since Herald of Ice procs off when you kill a frozen enemy and they shatter, it will become more and more reliable the higher your crit chance is, as crits will make enemies freeze and shatter. For mobility we use Dash and Blink Arrow, with the latter also being linked to faster attacks. In that same setup we also add in the Hatred Aura for a powerful cold damage buff. Finally, to generate frenzy charges and increase our attack speed, we use Blood Rage and Wall Haste linked to increase duration for a significant damage increase through these. In that same setup, we also add Steel Skin as a way of indirectly adding a large amount of additional effective health to the life pool.
A skill
You will want to use any time you pretty much run
into
a pack of
monsters.
Alright, so with the skill gems out of the way, let's take a look at the skill tree. What you see running in the background is the way I recommend you go about spending your points as you level up, and while you watch that, I am going to give you a rundown of the types of nodes that we're interested in and why for this build. Since Ice Shot by itself converts 60% of physical damage into cold damage, it means that elemental and cold damage modifiers are going to be an efficient way of scaling the damage. We can then further amplify this by converting the remaining 40% physical damage portion to cold by picking up the Winter Spirit notable. By doing so means that we get the full damage scaling effect from any of the elemental or cold damage scaling nodes in the tree. That said, the bow I recommend for this build deals a rather significant amount of physical damage too, and since the elemental damage conversion is calculated after, we have the added benefit of also being able to benefit from physical damage, as that is simply converted to cold after. So besides modifiers that increase both physical and elemental damage, we're also looking for attack speed, projectile damage, crit chains, and multiplier nodes. And since this build is designed primarily with the intent of being a fast mapper rather than a boss killer, we also pick up a few movement speed nodes throughout the skill tree. Since it is a life-based build, we are obviously also interested in life nodes to allow efficient scaling of whatever flat amount we get from the gear. But as with many bow builds, the total amount of health we're able to achieve with this is relatively low, coming in at 174% maximum health. Which, to be honest, is probably the lowest health build I've ever done. But together with proper use of Steel Skin, it works alright, and I know there's lots of people who don't even go past 150% health. But
shame!
I can't even look at you guys. I can't look. One thing is for sure, you'll want to get as high life rolls as you possibly can afford on any rare piece of gear to ensure that the otherwise relatively low life we obtain from the skill tree can be efficiently scaled. We also pick up the Acrobatics keystone with this setup for a 30% chance to dodge, which together with the high amount of evasion we achieve with this build, makes us rather hard to, well,
hit.
So to sum up, the types of passives we're interested in for this build in priority are life, attack speed, critical strike chains and multiplier, bow, elemental, cold and physical damage, and then finally evasion and movement speed modifiers. Pretty straightforward. As for Pantheon choices, we pick the Soul of Lunaris for extra movement speed, dodge and projectile evasion modifiers, and the Soul of Garukan for the extra evade chains and movement speed boost. Now let's talk gear. The weapon I use for this setup, and also in big part the reason I went Slayer, is the Lion Eyes Glare. With this we will have a 100% chance to hit and thus not have to worry about accuracy. It also has a rather high base damage and attack speed, and while the base crit chance is only 5%, the Slayer's Overwhelm notable fixes that and effectively turns it into an 8% base crit chance bow, making it possible without having to invest insane amounts to use the Lion Eyes Glare in a crit build. It also has the Far Shot affix, which basically just means that the further you are away from your target when hitting it with your attacks, the more damage you're going to deliver. This is a rather cheap bow that in this setup does a wonderful job and provide everything we need from a bow really. That said, as a viable alternative you can also use the Death's Opus bow. The benefit to this is that you will be shooting 2 extra projectiles, something that can potentially increase the clear speed of Ice Shot and single target of Barrage by quite a bit. However, it is at the cost of attacking slower and having to then get accuracy for it to rival the damage of the Lion Eyes Glare bow. If you decide on going with the Death's Opus, I recommend sacrificing the Endless Hunger keystone for impact for the added accuracy, not to mention up to 50% increased area of effect with the Ice Shot cone. That together with a few accuracy rolls on your gear could definitely be a solid alternative to the Lion Eyes Glare, and possibly a better one too if you're willing to make the sacrifice. Together with our bow we use the Void Fletcher quiver. On paper there are other quivers that are better, but when factoring in the Void Shot ability that it grants, it becomes very hard for anything to combat the single target damage potential it adds. Void Shot is basically this passive ability that triggers and consumes a void charge whenever you shoot an arrow. It then creates this void AoE circle on the ground below the target that after a short duration explodes and deals damage to whatever is near it. The awesome part about this is that when you combine it with Barrage that by itself shoots 5 projectiles and more when paired with greater multiple projectiles, then all of the 5 void charges you may have stored up at that time gets consumed instantly to deliver 5 explosions in the same area, delivering a ton of extra damage, which is especially useful for boss fights. The quiver is rather cheap too, but if you want to, a well-crafted
extra projectile added damage quiver
can be a great alternative too, but obviously also much more expensive. For chest armor we use the Heris Ire, primarily for the massive amount of flat added cold damage it adds to the build, but also the high evasion and extra dodge chains it provides. At the current time, Heris Ire is a bit expensive, and in case you can't afford it, then the Loreweave chest is another great alternative too. For gloves we use the Shadows and Dust, mostly due to them being able to grant Rampage, an effect that adds the kill counter up in the left corner that once you reach certain thresholds deliver various buffs, but most importantly 1% increased movement speed and 2% increased damage per 20 Rampage stacks. This quickly adds up and becomes a very powerful mechanic just in itself, but the gloves also have a nice amount of extra crit multiplier and grants a bit of extra critical strike chains, so we'll take it. If you really wanted to take these gloves to the next level, then you should consider corrupting them and hope for the base critical strike chains roll as a solid way of increasing your overall critical strike chains. However, you should only attempt this if you know what you're doing. We also use the Mark of the Elder Ring with a rare Shaper Ring on the other hand for a nice damage boost, but of course also for the extra maximum life it provides. Keep in mind that until you get yourself a decent rare Shaper Ring, it really isn't worth using this ring. Until then, just stick to 2 solid rare rings that can help you with your elemental resists or whatever you need instead. To scale the damage further, we also incorporate the Wise Oak and Dying Sun Flask. The Dying Sun is especially strong with Barrage, as that skill does with anything that adds extra projectiles gain a lot of extra damage. One thing to keep in mind is that whenever you activate the Dying Sun Flask, your fire resistances go up by a large amount. If this exceeds the cold resistance, the damage bonus effect of the Wise Oak isn't going to work properly for your cold damage. And it can be a bit of a hassle to set this up, but if you have the patience, then it's well worth it in the end. If not, you can simply use an Serious Promise instead, as it delivers almost the same amount of damage, if well rolled. The only remaining unique items for the build is the 2 very cheap Omen on the Winds Threshold Jewels. With these, Ice Shot gains 25% increased area of effect, and the ability to pierce 3 additional targets per jewel. If you have to prioritize anything, then prioritize these. Ice Shot is going to feel terrible without them. When it comes to the remaining rare gear, we can divide the stat priorities into a defensive and offensive category, and of the 2 categories, the defensive one takes priority at any time. For defensive stats, we're looking for a high life roll combined with enough resistances so that your gear totals enough to reach the soft cap of 75% in each element, and you preferably want to supplement it with a high evasion roll. For offensive stats, you need to look out for attack speed, crit multiplier, flat added cold damage, and anything that scales cold or elemental damage percentages. Flat added physical damage works too, but it is your last priority. So to sum up the stat priorities for your rare gear, look for high life roll, elemental resistances, evasion, attack speed, crit multiplier, added cold damage, increased elemental or cold damage percentage modifiers, and flat added physical damage. If you find the gearing process complicated and not sure how to properly trade for it or look for it, then check my gearing guide that I've linked in the description. It will show you the very basics of building the foundation of pretty much any build, while at the same time only spending very little currency to get there. Alright, so far so good. Now let me share some leveling tips with you, as bow builds in general can be a bit of a pain in the pussy to level. First of all, I recommend you invest in a few very cheap leveling items, as these will make it much easier and faster to reach endgame, with the most important ones being the bows. Of these, I recommend the Silver Branch that you can use already from level 1. Then once you reach level 5, start using the Quill Rainbow. At level 18, use the Wrath's Reach. At level 32, pick up the Death's Harp. And at level 44 you can grab the Death's Opus bow and use that all the way up to level 66, when you can start using the Lion Eyes Glare, or continue using that one if that is the setup you go with. Together with these, I also recommend you get yourself a Heris quiver at level 10, and once you reach level 45, get the upgraded version, the Heris Demise, for a solid overall damage boost. So these are the base leveling items I recommend, but if you don't mind spending a bit more currency, then I also recommend getting yourself a Gold Rim helmet, a pair of Wanderlust boots, 2 Blackheart rings, the Karui Ward amulet, the Loctonial Caress gloves, and once you reach level 24, get yourself 2 lube of all rings, as these are absolutely amazing when leveling due to the resistances, attributes and damage they provide. All of these items are very cheap and they will make a big difference for your overall early level enjoyment of the belt, and I highly recommend you get them. You should of course also get yourself the 2 Omen on the Winds jewels and add them in as soon as possible. Alright, so besides the leveling items, I also recommend that you start out by using Shrapnel Shot until you can add your first Omen on the Winds jewel to the skill tree. After that you can start using Ice Shot, but you may still want to keep the Shrapnel Shot set up just in case it doesn't feel too good at that point. Early on I suggest linking either skill to Onslaught, added fire damage and eventually added cold damage for Shrapnel Shot, and lesser multiple projectiles for Ice Shot once you get a 4-link for these skills. Once you reach level 22, get yourself a Silver Flask and replace the Onslaught support with elemental damage with attacks. If you're having trouble sustaining mana early on, then I recommend you don't use the greater multiple projectiles, but stick to the lesser multiple projectiles until you can sustain it later, as it has less of a mana cost multiplier. Sometime around level 35, try to get yourself a cheap 5-link chest armor for your Ice Shot ability and add added cold damage to your setup, and replace your added fire damage with hypothermia. And also please remember to level these skills as you go, even if you won't use them yet, so you don't end up in a situation where they are completely underleveled to the area you're traversing. Also keep in mind that Barrage single target kinda sucks in the beginning, so as an alternative you might want to consider the Vol Rain of Arrows skill in a secondary setup to help with boss fights. For that I recommend the same support gems as I mentioned just before. Also I highly recommend that you don't place your attack setup in your leveling bows, as you'll be changing these rather often, and thus will have to re-suck it, link and color every time you start using a new weapon. You'll probably be using the Gold Rim for a while, so it would be a good idea to put your main gem setup in that one. Or alternatively get yourself a Tabula Rasa if you don't mind spending the currency. Also make sure you don't get too hung up on wanting to keep using the leveling items I suggested. You will outgrow these, so to speak, as you progress, and you need to make sure you replace them with proper rare gear with the affixes I mentioned earlier, if you find anything better. And that's about it guys. You can find the Path of Building paste bin in the description below and import it to see the belt details. In that I have also included leveling trees and budget gear suggestions to get inspired by. If you want to help me out, please consider clicking that like button, subscribe and ring that bell icon for future content. And if you want to take it even further, consider visiting my Patreon at patreon.com/liftingnerdbro. No matter what, thank you. I'm grateful you're watching my video. And bros, do you even nerd?